Welcome back to another story that is going to reach straight into your chest and squeeze until you feel every single beat of it. If you are new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell the kind of stories that stay with you long after the last word. The kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and what it truly means to belong somewhere. And if you have been here before, you already know that we do not do shallow around. Here, we go deep. We go real. We go to the places that romance is afraid to touch. So settle in, get comfortable, and let this one take you somewhere wild. The morning Mara Ashwood walked into the forbidden forest at the edge of Blackstone territory, she was not thinking about wolves. She was thinking about the dying patch of silverweed she had found the week before, its silver leaves curling inward like tiny fists clenched against some invisible poison, and about the woman in the village below, whose fever had not broken in 4 days, despite every remedy Mara had tried. She was thinking about root depth and soil contamination, and the particular way certain fungi spread underground before they surface, invisible and devastating. She was not thinking about territorial boundaries or pack laws or the very clear and very old agreement that humans did not enter the forest beyond the 3 white stones that marked the edge of what was considered safe. She was thinking about medicine, about healing, about the stubborn and singular focus that had always made her both exceptional and occasionally foolish in equal measure. Mara was 28 years old and had lived alone in the mountain cottage her grandmother had left her for 6 years. She had moved there after finishing her degree in ethnobotany, initially intending it to be temporary, a season or 2 of cataloging the remarkable biodiversity of the Cascade Range before returning to the university. But the mountain had held her, in a way she had never quite been able to explain to the colleagues who sent increasingly puzzled emails asking when she was coming back. There was something in the air up there, something in the quality of light through old-growth trees, and the particular silence that existed between birdsong that made the idea of fluorescent offices and faculty meetings feel like a kind of slow suffocation. She had stayed. She had built a practice, trading her herbal preparations for the things she needed, earning a quiet but genuine reputation among the scattered communities of the high country as someone who knew plants the way other people knew language, intuitively, completely, in a way that went beyond technique into something closer to conversation. She was good at her work. She was perhaps the best at it within 300 miles, and she knew this without arrogance, the way a person knows the color of their own eyes. It was simply fact, and fact this particular morning meant that she needed specific plants from specific locations, and the specific location where those plants grew most abundantly happened to be on the other side of the 3 white stones. She had paused at the boundary. She had looked at the stones, smooth and pale and ancient, arranged in a triangle that generations of mountain tradition said marked the edge of the world where human rules applied. She had thought about the fever that had not broken. She had stepped across. The forest beyond the boundary was different in ways that were not immediately obvious, and then were suddenly overwhelming. The trees were older, their bark darker, their canopy so dense that the morning light arrived in narrow columns rather than broad illumination, turning the undergrowth into a world of deep green shadow and golden shafts. The silence was different too. Not the comfortable silence of familiar woods, but something heavier, more deliberate, as though the forest itself was paying attention. Mara noticed it, but did not turn back. She had a compass, a detailed hand-drawn map of the terrain she had constructed from aerial photographs, and the fragmentary accounts of the few people who admitted to having crossed the boundary before her, and a complete focus on the task ahead. She found the silverweed within 40 minutes, a patch of it flourishing in a clearing where a stream crossed a particular kind of schist that seemed to create exactly the mineral conditions the plant preferred. She was crouched over it, her collecting bag open beside her, her fingers moving carefully through the leaves to select the most mature specimens, when she heard it. The sound was not loud. It was barely more than a shift in the weight of the air, a displacement of pressure that her body registered before her mind had processed it as a specific threat. But her body was faster than her mind in that moment, and her body said run. She stood and turned in the same motion, and came face to face with the bear. It was enormous. That was the first thing, the fact of its size. which was wrong in a way that went beyond the merely impressive dimensions of a large grizzly, and into something that made the primitive parts of her brain, the parts that remembered when humans were prey, light up with pure screaming alarm. It was too big. Its shoulders were at her eye level when it stood on all fours, which meant that when it reared up onto its hind legs in the next second, it became a wall of fur and muscle and breath that blocked out the light and the sky and everything except the immediate, terrible reality of it, and its eyes. The eyes were wrong. They were not the dark amber of a healthy bear, but something murkier, something that seemed to move within itself like oil on water, shot through with threads of dull red that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with something she had no name for. Mara did not scream. She did not run. Both of those things would have been useless, and she knew it in the same instant she knew she was going to die here in this forbidden forest, with the silverweed in her bag and the woman's fever still unbroken. She stood completely still, the way she had been taught, the way every piece of wilderness knowledge she had ever absorbed told her to stand in the presence of a bear, and the bear looked at her with those wrong red-threaded eyes, and she understood, in a way that was more feeling than thought, that stillness was not going to save her. This was not a frightened bear. This was not a territorial bear. This was something that had been sent, or something that had been changed into a thing that wanted specifically to destroy. It charged. The sound it made when it moved was massive, the kind of sound that seems to rearrange the air, and Mara had enough time to think with extraordinary clarity that she wished she had told her sister she loved her more recently. And then something happened that she did not at first understand. A shape came from the left, from the dense shadow between two enormous firs, moving at a speed that seemed to belong to a different category of motion than anything she had previously witnessed. It was large and dark, and it hit the bear with a force that redirected the charge completely, sending the massive animal skidding sideways on the stream-damp earth with a sound like a tree falling. The bear recovered. Of course it recovered. It was the size of a car and made of muscle and whatever dark wrongness had altered it. But in the moment of its recovery, the shape resolved itself into something she could see clearly. A wolf, an enormous wolf, dark gray shading to black at its spine and the tips of its ears, standing between her and the bear, with its legs braced wide and its head low, and a sound coming from its chest that she felt in her teeth, not a growl exactly. Something older than a growl, something that said without any ambiguity whatsoever that this space, this patch of earth, this specific human being, currently standing 6 feet behind it, was not something that the bear was going to reach without going through the wolf first. The bear charged again. The wolf met it. What followed was approximately 90 seconds of violence so intense and so focused that Mara stood and watched it with the feeling of watching something geological, something tectonic, forces of nature in collision rather than creatures. The wolf was fast in a way that seemed to defy its size, capable of pivoting on nothing, of being where the bear was not, while simultaneously being exactly where it needed to be to inflict damage. It was not winning, not exactly. The bear was too large and too wrongly strong. But the wolf was not losing either. It was holding the space between her and the thing that wanted to reach her, taking damage and returning it, and holding. And then it happened. The wolf caught the bear at a precise point on the side of its neck, and something changed. The bear convulsed. The red threads in its eyes flared and then guttered out like candles in a wind, and suddenly it was just a large and badly wounded grizzly, disoriented and frightened and nothing like the directed killing machine it had been 60 seconds earlier. The bear turned and ran. The forest accepted it back, and the clearing was quiet. Mara stood in the silence for a long moment. Then she looked at the wolf. It had turned to face her. It was breathing hard, blood matting its fur in several places, and it was looking at her with eyes that were amber, clean and clear and amber. And behind the amber, something that she had no framework for identifying, but that felt, impossibly, like recognition. She stared at it. It stared at her. Somewhere in the middle distance, she became aware of other presences, a sense of being watched from multiple angles, the forest full of held breath and attention. Then the wolf collapsed. If you are already feeling this story in your bones, drop a comment below and tell me what you think is going to happen next. Because the best part of telling stories is knowing that you are out there feeling every twist alongside me. Now, let's keep going. Mara moved before she made a conscious decision to move, crossing the clearing to where the wolf had gone down and dropping to her knees beside it. It was even larger up close, its body spanning a length that would have made a wildlife biologist's career. And it was losing blood from at least 3 significant wounds. She was a herbalist, not a veterinarian, but she was a person who had spent years learning how bodies worked and what they needed. And the first thing a body needed in this situation was pressure. She opened her collecting bag and used the largest pieces of clean linen she carried for wrapping specimens to press against the worst of the wounds. And she talked to the wolf while she did it, not because she expected it to understand, but because she was frightened. And talking helped, and the wolf's amber eyes stayed fixed on her face with an attention that was not animal. "You have to stay with me," she said, pressing hard against a wound on its shoulder. "I know that probably sounds absurd given that we have never met, but you came between me and that thing without any reason to, and I am not going to watch you bleed out in this clearing. So you need to stay awake, and you need to keep breathing, and I need you to understand that I am trying to help you even though I know this hurts." The wolf held her gaze and kept breathing. She did not notice the other wolves until one of them stepped out of the trees. There were 7 of them. She counted later, when she had the processing capacity for counting. They were all enormous in the way the dark wolf was enormous, though none quite matched it, and they were in wolf form, ranging in color from a tawny gold to a silver that was almost white. And they formed a loose circle at the edge of the clearing, and they stared at her and the fallen wolf, with expressions that she would have called shocked if she had believed wolves capable of shock. They did not approach. They did not retreat. They simply stood there in their circle, with the unmistakable energy of people who had just witnessed something that had rearranged their understanding of how the world worked. Mara looked at them, and then looked back at the wolf under her hands, and made a decision. "If any of you can help him," she said, "now would be the time." The silver wolf at the front of the group made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite anything she had vocabulary for. And then something happened that took everything she thought she understood about the world and quietly filed it under outdated. The silver wolf shifted. It was not slow. It was not gradual. It was like watching a knot untie itself in reverse, the wolf resolving into a man in a motion that her eyes tracked, but her brain kept refusing to fully commit to as real. The man was perhaps 40, silver-haired, and sharp-featured, with the kind of physical presence that takes up more space than the body it belongs to. He was looking at her with an expression she could not read. He was looking at the wolf she was pressing her hands against, with an expression she could read completely, and it was something between disbelief and a complicated grief. "You are pressing on the brachial artery approach," the man said. "Move your left hand 2 inches toward the spine." She moved her hand. He was right. The bleeding slowed. "Who are you?" he asked. "Mara Ashwood. I live at the Whitmore cottage, the other side of the boundary stones." "Who is he?" The man was quiet for a moment in a way that felt deliberate. "His name is Cain Blackridge," he said. "And what he just did should not have been possible." "Why not?" Another deliberate pause. "Because he has no reason to. No pack. No bond. No claim on this territory or anything in it." He looked at her with eyes that were the same amber she had just spent 5 minutes staring into on a wolf's face. No reason at all to risk his life for a human he has never met. Mara looked down at Cain Blackridge's still face. He had shifted too, at some point in the last few minutes, and she had somehow not noticed, which seemed impossible, but was apparently what had happened, because the wolf was gone, and in its place was a man, lean and dark-haired, and perhaps 32 or 33, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes open and still fixed on her with that amber attention. He was as badly wounded in this form as he had been in the other, and she kept her hands where they were. "Well," she said. "He did it anyway." Cain Blackridge looked at her for a long moment. Then, Extraordinarily, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The intention of one. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with pain and something else. "I did." Across the clearing, the other wolves had emerged from the trees, and 6 of them had shifted, and were standing in a group that radiated the particular energy of people having a rapidly whispered argument about something they cannot quite believe. One of them, a tall young man with tawny hair, kept looking between Cain and Mara with an expression of pure stunned bewilderment, as though the scene before him violated laws he had believed to be absolute, which, as Mara would come to understand over the following days, it did. The silver-haired man, whose name she would learn was Aldrich Vane, and who was the Betas of the Blackstone Pack, crouched beside Cain and performed a rapid assessment of his injuries with hands that moved with clinical efficiency and eyes that held something beyond clinical concern. "You know what this means," Aldrich said. Not quite a question. "I know," Cain said. "Darian is not going to welcome it." "I know that too." Aldrich looked at Mara. "The law of the Bloodguard," he said, with the tone of someone deciding to explain something they are not certain they should be explaining. "When a member of our kind interposes themselves between a human and mortal danger and sustains wounds doing so, old law requires the pack nearest to the site of the interposition to provide protection to both parties until the matter can be formally reviewed. It has not been invoked in over 200 years. Most of us thought it had passed out of relevance." Mara absorbed this. "Most of you being wrong about that is the reason this man is currently bleeding in my hands," she observed. Aldrich blinked at her. Then very slightly he smiled. "Yes," he said. "That is accurate. So, what does the formal review involve?" "It involves you and Cain both coming within Blackstone territory, under pack protection, until the Alpha has assessed the situation." Mara looked at Cain, who was watching her with those steady amber eyes and the controlled breathing of someone managing significant pain with practiced discipline. "What do you think?" she asked him directly, ignoring everyone else in the clearing, because he was the one bleeding, and he was the one who had made the choice that had apparently upended 200 years of dormant law, and it seemed to her that his opinion was the relevant one. He studied her for a moment with an attention that felt like being measured and found, not wanting, but interesting, like a problem he had not expected to encounter, and was now genuinely engaged with. "I think," he said carefully, "that whatever was in that bear is going to send something else. And I think the cottage on the other side of the boundary stones is not going to be adequate protection." Mara considered the bear's wrong red eyes. She considered the fever that had not broken in the village below. She considered the dying silverweed with its leaves curled inward like fists. "You think they are connected," she said. "The corruption, the bear, whatever is happening to the plants." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, and then something sharper. "How do you know?" "About the corruption? I am a botanist. I have been watching the indicators for 3 months. Something is poisoning the soil in expanding rings from a point source I have not been able to locate yet." She paused. "How long have you known?" 6 months, he said, give or take. They looked at each other across the fact of that. 2 people who had been separately watching the same disaster approach from different angles. And something passed between them in that look that was not yet anything, with a name, but was the seed of something. Potential curled tight like the silver weed leaves. Waiting. "All right," Mara said. She looked at Aldrich. "I will come, but I am bringing my kit, and if anyone needs medicine while I am there, I expect to be allowed to provide it without anyone telling me that humans do not do things that way." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating. "That seems fair," he said. "This is the part of the story where everything accelerates, where the world that has been quietly tilting for 6 months tilts far enough that everyone can feel it. Make sure you have liked this video, because the algorithm needs to know that you want stories like this one. And the algorithm, unlike the pack laws of the Blackstone wolves, responds to very clear signals. Like the video. Let's continue. The Blackstone Pack compound was 3 miles into the forest, built around a central lodge of dark timber and local stone that managed to look both ancient and functional. Its architecture clearly designed for people who spent significant portions of their lives in forms that did not use doors the conventional way. It was surrounded by a cluster of smaller structures connected by covered walkways. The whole thing tucked into a natural amphitheater of granite that provided shelter from the wind and, Mara suspected, from things other than wind. There were approximately 40 people in residence, ranging in age from very young children to a woman of perhaps 90 who sat in a carved chair near the main fire and watched Mara's arrival with eyes that had the amber warmth of deep amber, but a depth behind them that suggested she had been watching arrivals at this compound for longer than most of the trees surrounding it had been standing. Mara was given a room in the main lodge and told, with a courtesy that had a firm edge to it, that she should remain within the central structures until the Alpha had been informed and had indicated his preference for how to proceed. Kane was taken to what appeared to be a medical facility, modest but well-equipped in ways that again suggested significant thought had gone into the specific needs of a population that healed faster than humans, but not instantly, and she was told he would be seen to. She asked if she could see him. She was told with the same courteous firmness that it would be better to wait. She waited. She was not good at waiting. By mid-afternoon she had catalogued every plant visible through the window of her room, identified 3 species she had not personally observed before, but recognized from the literature, eaten the food that was brought to her without particular attention to what it was, and organized her collecting kit 3 times. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Kane Blackridge. He had come from the shadow between 2 trees and put himself between her and something that would have killed her. And he had done it, without hesitation, and when she had asked him why he had not answered the why directly, only confirmed the fact of it. Yeah, I did. She kept returning to his eyes, the amber that had held hers in the clearing, and had not let go even when he was managing the kind of pain that would have had most people not thinking about anything except the pain. He had been focused on her, not concerned or possessive in the way she might have expected from someone who had just saved her life, not radiating the particular self-satisfaction of dramatic rescue, just focused, with the quality of attention of someone who has encountered something genuinely interesting and is taking it seriously. She wanted to talk to him. She wanted to talk to him about the corruption in the soil and the expanding rings she had mapped, and the point source she had not found, and the bear's red-threaded eyes, and approximately 40 other things that she suspected he had information about that would fit with her information in ways that would illuminate something neither of them could see from their individual vantage points. She wanted this the way she always wanted the next piece of a puzzle she was working on, with a focused urgency that was professional and clean. She was also aware, sitting on the edge of the bed in the Blackstone Lodge, that what she wanted to do was not only professional, and it was not only clean, and she noted that awareness the way she noted plant anomalies, with careful attention and without judgment. The Alpha arrived at the compound at dusk. Darien Stone was 6'4" and built like the architecture of the lodge, all dark timber and local stone, massive and deliberate and deeply rooted. He was perhaps 45, with dark hair shot through with gray at the temples, and a face that would have been handsome, except that it had the specific quality of a face that had long since stopped being available, had withdrawn behind authority and command into something that was impressive, in the way that monumental architecture is impressive, more statement than invitation. He walked into the main hall of the lodge with the absolute certainty of a person who has never in their adult life entered a space where they were not immediately the most powerful thing present. He stopped when he saw Mara. He looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has been told something is true and is now encountering the truth of it and finding it simultaneously exactly as described, and somehow unexpected. Then he smiled, and the smile was practiced in a way that reminded her, uncomfortably, of certain academic administrators she had dealt with. "Ms. Ashwood," he said, "welcome to Blackstone. I understand you had quite a morning." "I did," she agreed. "Thank you for the hospitality." "Of course." He settled into the large chair at the head of the table, a motion that was clearly habitual and clearly claimed the space as his, with a thoroughness that did not require words. I also understand that we have an old law to discuss. Aldrich explained the basics. Then you understand that you are under pack protection for the duration of the review. He met her eyes. For your safety. Completely for your safety. She held his gaze and thought, no, not completely. There is something else in this for you. And I have not determined what it is yet. But she said, I appreciate that, and meant the words, if not the complete agreement with the subtext. And Kane, Darian said, and his voice did something subtle on the name. A compression, like a hand closing carefully. Kane Blackridge, who has been outside pack structure for 3 years. He looked at a point slightly past Mara's shoulder. His return to the territory under these circumstances is an interesting development. He saved my life, Mara said. Yes. Darian's voice was even. He did, at significant personal cost. Yes, that seems like a fairly unambiguous thing. Darian looked at her. Very little about Kane Blackridge is unambiguous, Ms. Ashwood. I hope your stay with us will help you understand that. He rose. The meeting clearly concluded from his perspective. We will conduct the formal review in 3 days. Until then, please consider yourself our guest. If you need anything, Aldrich will see to it. He paused. I would ask that you refrain from visiting Kane until he is recovered enough to receive visitors. And when will that be? When I say it is, Darian said, very pleasantly, and left. Mara sat with the silence he left behind and thought about the way he had said Kane's name. That compression, that careful closing hand, 3 years outside pack structure. She thought about what Aldrich had said in the clearing. Most of us thought it had passed out of relevance. 200 years. She thought about the way Kane had said, I know, twice, in response to Aldrich's warning, with the specific tone of someone accepting a consequence they had foreseen and decided to incur. Anyway, she thought, there is a history here that I do not have, and I need it. She found Aldrich in the kitchen garden on the south side of the compound, doing something practical with a row of herbs that he clearly had some knowledge of. His silver-haired head bent over the plants with a focus that reminded her of her own. She stopped beside him and crouched to look at what he was doing, and he made space for her without comment. He was expelled, she said, not a question. Yes, by Darian. A pause. Yes. Why? Aldrich was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the garden. Kane was the previous Alpha's son, he said. When Alpha Gregor died, 3.5 years ago, there was a succession question. Kane was the heir by blood, but Darian was the beta. And he had support. And he challenged. Under pack law, a formal challenge between a blood heir and a challenger is resolved by combat. He paused. Or by the heirs. Refusal. Kane refused? Not exactly. Aldrich's voice was careful. Kane made a different argument. He said the challenge was based on a false claim, that Darian had been involved in the circumstances of Gregor's death. He looked at her. He could not prove it. Darian demanded a formal combat. Kane refused to participate in a system that was, in his view, being used to launder an injustice. Under pack law, refusal is treated as abdication. He returned his gaze to the garden. He was exiled, stripped of rank and territory. Mara processed this. And you believe him? That Darian was involved in the former Alpha's death? Another long pause. I believe, Aldrich said carefully, that Gregor's death was not fully explained, and I believe that Kane is the most honest person I have met in 40 years among my kind, and I believe that the situation is more complicated than I have the power to address. He looked at his hands. I am Beta. My function is to support the Alpha and protect the, pack. I try to do that as well as I can, even when the Alpha might be someone who does not deserve to be Alpha. Aldrich looked at her with something that might have been relief at having someone say it plainly. Even then, he said. For now. Mara nodded slowly. Tell me about the corruption, she said. The soil contamination, the affected animals. What do you know? He told her. It took an hour and went well past the garden and into the kitchen, and through 2 cups of the tea she made from her own supplies. and what emerged was a picture that matched and extended her own observations in ways that were illuminating and deeply troubling. The corruption had begun, as near as Aldrich could determine, approximately 8 months ago, starting at a point in the deep forest that corresponded roughly to a location she had identified as her probable point source from her own mapping data. It had expanded in the irregular but broadly concentric pattern she had observed in the plant. Indicators. The animals were the worst indication. Birds falling from the sky, disoriented, deer moving in wrong patterns, and now bears, which ordinarily avoided pack territory without being controlled by anything, moving within it and displaying the red-threaded wrongness she had seen in the creature that had charged her. "The source point," she said. "What is there?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "There is an old structure. Stone. Predates the current pack by several generations at least. We have always treated it as historical. As a ruin. There have been stories about it. Old stories about what it was built for, but they are the kind of stories that accumulate around old things, and are not always reliable. What do the stories say? They say it was built as a seal," he said. "A containment. For something old that predated even our kind's presence in these mountains." He paused. "The stories also say that the seal required maintenance, that there were people, long ago, whose function it was to maintain it. That when those people stopped, eventually, the seal would fail." Mara set down her cup. "What kind of people?" "The stories call them the boundary keepers," Aldrich said, and looked at her with those amber eyes that had been watching the world for longer than she had been alive. "They were not wolves, the stories say. They were human women. Women with a particular blood, a particular affinity for the boundary between things. Between the wild world and the kept world. Between the natural and the unnatural." He paused. "The stories say their blood could feed the seal, reinforce it, and that when the last of them died without passing on the knowledge of what they were, the seal began to slowly, over generations, fail." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the forest held its heavy, watched attention. "My grandmother," Mara said, and her voice was steady because she was a person who dealt in facts, and this was a fact, strange, and transforming and entirely requiring of her steadiness. "My grandmother lived in this mountain for 60 years. She never explained why she chose it. She left the cottage to me specifically. Not to my mother, not to my sister. To me. She said I would understand when I needed to." She looked at Aldrich. "I always thought she meant the mountain itself. The plants. The work. Perhaps she meant all of it," Aldrich said quietly. "If you have ever had a moment where the thing you thought your life was about turns out to be pointing toward something larger than you understood, I want you to put that in the comments. Because Mara is standing in that moment right now, and she deserves to know she is not alone in it. While you are there, leave a like, because this story has a lot further to go and I need to know you are here for all of it." She went to Kane that night. She was not supposed to. Darian had been clear about that. Pleasantly and absolutely clear. And she understood that clear pleasantness as the specific social technology of someone who was accustomed to having their clarity respected. She respected it for approximately 7 hours, and then, at 11 o'clock with the compound quiet around her, she put on her boots and her jacket and followed the layout she had been quietly mapping since her arrival to the medical building on the eastern edge of the central structures. The door was not locked. She registered this as significant. Either her presence was less controlled than Darian had implied, or it was more controlled, in the sense that whoever was watching her was watching from a distance, allowing her the illusion of agency while observing her choices. She filed both possibilities and went in. Kane was awake. He was lying on a cot in the back room of the medical building, with his eyes open and his hands folded on his stomach, and the quality of stillness about him, of someone who has spent a great deal of time alone with nothing to do but think, and has made their peace with that. He looked at her when she came in without surprise, the way people look at things they have been expecting. "They told you not to come," he said. "Yes," she agreed, pulling up the only chair in the room and sitting beside the cot. She looked at his wounds, which were dressed professionally, and already healing at a rate that confirmed everything she had been told about werewolf physiology. How are you feeling? Better than this morning. That is a low bar. The corner of his mouth moved again. More than before. Yeah, he said. It is. He studied her with that focused attention, the quality of it unchanged from the clearing, unhurried and serious. You went to Aldrich. He is easier to talk to than Darian. Most things are easier to deal with than Darian. She looked at him. Tell me why you did it, she said. Not accusing, not demanding. Just asking, the way she asked questions about plants, because she wanted to understand how things worked, and not understanding felt like an incompleteness she could not settle into. Kane was quiet for long enough that she thought he was deciding whether to answer. Then he said, I have been in this forest for 3 years, watching. The corruption, the contamination, the way it spreads. I have been trying to map it from the outside because I do not have access to the pack's records or their territorial monitoring. He paused. I have also been watching the boundary stones, watching who crosses them and when. You were watching me, she said. I was watching the forest, he said. You happened to be in it. But yes, I have seen you before, twice, at the edge of the boundary, once collecting what looked like bark samples from the silver firs, once just standing at the stones and looking in. A pause. You have the kind of attention that the forest responds to. It is not common. Mara thought of her grandmother. No, she said. I suppose it is not. When you crossed this morning, I followed, because the corruption has reached the point where the animals are affected, and I did not think you knew that yet, and because I have been trying to figure out what you are for 3 months, and I was not going to let the forest answer that question before I could. She absorbed this. What I am, she repeated. The stories, he said. I know the old stories. My father knew them. He used to tell them to me when I was young. Stories about the seal and the women who maintained it, and what it meant that they were gone. He looked at the ceiling. When I saw you at the boundary stones the first time, there was something about the way the light fell around you. Not metaphorically, actually, like the stones recognized you. He paused. I told myself I was imagining it. And the second time? The second time I told myself I was imagining it again, and started watching you more carefully. Mara looked at her hands. She had her grandmother's hands. She had always known that. The same length of finger and the same particular way. The light caught the fine hairs on her wrist. Her grandmother, who had chosen this mountain, who had left the cottage to her specifically. What happened to your father? She asked. The quality of the silence changed. He died, Kane said. 3.5 years ago. Officially of a heart attack, which is possible for our kind, under significant stress. We are not immortal. We are long-lived and we are resilient, but we can die of ordinary causes. He paused. I did not believe it was ordinary. And you could not prove otherwise. No, Darian was careful. A breath. He is always careful. Aldrich says you are the most honest person he has known in 40 years. Kane was quiet for a moment. Aldrich has known me since I was born, he said. He was my father's beta. He stayed when Darian took over because he thought he could moderate things from inside. I think he was wrong about that. But I understand why he made the choice. He is starting to think he was wrong too, she said. I can hear it. Kane looked at her. You read people the way you read plants, he said. I read living systems, she said. People are living systems. So are packs, I imagine. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Packs are very much living systems, with the same patterns of health and disease, the same indicators when something is wrong, the same tendency for disease to originate at a point source and spread outward. He paused. Darian is the point source. She thought about the corruption in the soil, the expanding rings, the point she had not been able to reach. Is he causing it? She asked. The supernatural contamination. Is he doing it intentionally? Kane's face did something complicated. I think he found something, he said. The old structure, the containment, the seal. I think he found it and interfered with it, not necessarily understanding what he was interfering with, but using it. trying to harness something he did not have the nature to control. He looked at her. The corruption is what happens when that kind of power is used without the right kind of anchor, without someone who can metabolize it correctly. Someone like a boundary keeper. Mara did not say. She thought it, and his amber eyes met hers. And she had the strong and strange impression that he heard it anyway. "Rest," she said, standing. "You are still healing. You will come back tomorrow," he said. Not a question. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had stepped out of shadow and darkness to stand between her and something enormous without any obligation to do so. Who had spent 3 years alone in a forest watching a catastrophe build and trying to understand it from the outside. Who had looked at her with recognition before he knew her name. "Yes," she said. "I will come back tomorrow." She was at the door when he spoke again. "Mara." It was the first time he had used her name. She stopped. "Thank you. For staying with me in the clearing. You did not have to do that." "Either." She turned and looked at him. "No," she said. "I suppose I did not." She paused. "But I did." The corner of his mouth, and this time it completed itself, a real and actual smile, tired and genuine and nothing like practiced. She carried it back to her room and sat with it in the dark and acknowledged, carefully and without judgment, that she was in a very significant amount of trouble. Do not go anywhere. This story is about to reach its first major turning point, and you do not want to. Miss what Darian does when he realizes that the human woman and the exiled wolf have become something neither of them intended. Subscribe right now if you have not already, because we are only halfway through and the best of this is still ahead of us. The formal review was set for the morning of the 3rd day, but the day before it, something happened that rearranged the timeline. Mara had been given limited and carefully supervised access to the compound surrounding forest for the purpose of her botanical work, which Darian had extended as a gesture of the hospitality he kept very deliberately performing. She had used this access to extend her mapping and to collect several samples she wanted to analyze, and she had also been using it to locate the old structure that Aldrich had described. She had not told anyone she was looking for it. She had simply paid attention to the indicators, the precise pattern of soil contamination, the direction in which the wrongness intensified, the way certain plant species oriented themselves in relation to the source the way plants orient toward light, except in this case toward something that was distinctly not light. She found it on the afternoon of the 2nd day. It was smaller than she had expected, a circle of stones perhaps 30 feet across, low walls of fitted granite that had clearly been built with great care and had been maintained, once, and had not been maintained for a long time. The stones were carved with patterns that she did not have the background to decode formally, but that she understood in the same bodily way she had understood that the bear was wrong. Patterns that said boundary, that said containing, that said held. In the center of the circle was a depression in the earth, perhaps 10 feet in diameter, and from this depression rose something she could not see directly but could feel, a pressure against her skin and her awareness, the sensation of something very large and very old pressing against a barrier that was no longer quite holding. Mara stood at the edge of the circle, and breathed, and felt her own blood respond to what was in front of her, the way a tuning fork responds to its corresponding pitch. She had not expected that. She had believed what Aldrich had told her, had incorporated it into her thinking as hypothesis, as framework, as a possibility that explained the data she had. She had not expected to stand at the edge of this circle and feel something in herself, answer it like a call. She stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the stone boundary, the pressure shifted. The wrongness she had been feeling, the source of the contamination, the thing pressing against the failing seal, did not disappear, but it reorganized itself, moved away from her like oil moving away from soap introduced to the surface of water. Her blood did something she had no anatomical language for, a warmth that moved through her from the soles of her feet upward, and the carved patterns in the stones around her seemed, for just a moment, to become more defined, as though the light fell differently on them, or they had remembered what they were for. She was standing in the middle of the circle, one hand on the central stone, and her eyes closed, processing what was happening in her body and trying to find the vocabulary for it, when she heard Darian behind her. "Remarkable," he said. She turned. He was standing at the edge of the circle, 6'4" and deliberate, and his face had lost the pleasant, practiced quality she had come to recognize as his social technology. What was underneath it was not angry, which she had expected. It was something more purely interested. The way a person looks at a resource they have just realized they have better access to than they thought. "You felt it immediately," he said. "I had to work with the structure for 3 weeks before I could feel anything at all, and what I felt was entirely external, pressure without resonance." He tilted his head. "You stepped in, and the resonance was immediate. That is the difference between someone who has been trained to this and someone who has the blood for it. You know what the structure is," she said. "I know what it was," he corrected. "I have been studying the old records since I became Alpha. Understanding what is here, what can be used, what can be leveraged. Power, Miss Ashwood, does not maintain itself. It requires resources. The seal is one. The corruption you have been watching is, I will be honest with you since you have clearly put significant work into understanding it, an unfortunate side effect of my attempts to draw on the seal's power without the correct biological interface. The biological interface being a boundary keeper," she said flatly. "Yes." He came closer, moving inside the circle now, and she tracked him with the precision of something that has suddenly become a prey animal and knows it and is refusing to behave like one. With the correct interface, the power the seal contains becomes controllable, usable. The contamination stops because it is no longer leaking from an improperly accessed source. The animals return to normal. The corruption resolves. He paused. And the Alpha, who has a boundary keeper as a controlled variable in his power base, becomes substantially more powerful than any Alpha in the region's history. "Controlled variable," Mara said. "I am being direct with you because I believe you are too intelligent to respond well to." Pretty framing. He stopped perhaps 6 feet from her. "You are here, under pack protection, in my territory. Kane Blackridge is here, also under pack protection, recovering from injuries. The formal review, which I control, can reach any number of conclusions." He paused. "Or we can discuss a different arrangement. One in which your expertise is formally recognized, your safety is genuinely guaranteed, and in which you help me stabilize what I have disrupted and keep it stable going forward." Mara looked at him. She thought about controlled variable. She thought about Kane in the clearing, moving at a speed that belonged to a different category, and the intention of a smile in his exhausted face. She thought about Aldrich in the kitchen garden, saying, "I believe that Kane is the most honest person I have met in 40 years among my kind." "No," she said. Darian blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "No," she said again. "I am not going to be your controlled variable. I am not going to help you. Harness power that you disrupted through your own recklessness, and that is currently poisoning this mountain, in exchange for my safety in a situation you are engineering." She kept her voice level because level was more effective than raised. "And I think you know that I know things about what is happening here that you need, which means this offer is not from a position of complete power, regardless of how you have framed it." He was very still. "You are in my territory," he said. "I am in a structure that recognizes me," she said. "I do not think that is the same thing." She was not certain about that. She was approximately 60% certain about that. But she held it with 100% of her voice, and her eyes, and the particular quality of stillness that she had learned, over years alone on a mountain, meant, "I am not moving from here." What happened next happened quickly. The sound of movement in the forest, multiple sets of feet at speed, and then Kane was at the edge of the circle, still not fully healed and moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who is not at full capacity and is absolutely committed to being here anyway. Behind him were Aldrich and 2 others, the young tawny-haired man from the clearing, whose name she had learned was Seth, and a compact, dark-eyed woman named Pyrrha, who had found reasons to pass by Mara's window several times in the previous 2 days, in the manner of someone who is conducting a surveillance operation while pretending to water plants. Kane looked at Mara, and then at Darian, and then at the circle, and his expression did something rapid and complex. "You are all right," he said to Mara. "I am fine," she said. "We were having a conversation. I could hear the conversation from the northern boundary," he said. "So could Aldrich and Pyrrha and Seth, because we were all already moving this way because we know where this structure is, and we know what you being in it means, and we were not going to wait for the formal review." Darian turned to look at them. His face had returned to its practiced pleasantness, but there was something different underneath it now, a calculation that had shifted, variables being reassessed. "Kane," he said. "Still recovering, I see." "I have recovered enough," Kane said. He stepped inside the circle, and the carved stones responded to him too. Mara saw, not the way they responded to her, not the call and answer of blood, but recognition of a different kind, the kind given to someone who belongs to the land the circle sits on, who carries the history of this place in his lineage. "Aldrich," he said, without taking his eyes off Darian. "Here," Aldrich said from the edge. "You told me once that you had documentation of the circumstances of my father's death, that you had kept it, but had not known what to do with it." A long silence. "Yes," Aldrich said. "I am asking you to do something with it now." Another silence. Mara, standing in the center of the circle, with the sealed something pressing against the barrier around her, and the warmth of her blood still moving through her from the soles of her feet upward, watched the oldest decision Aldrich Vane had in him surface in his face. 40 years of service to a structure he had believed in, shaped by a man he had respected, continued under a man he had not been able to prove unworthy. And now, at the edge of an ancient stone circle in a poisoned forest, being asked by the man he had watched grow up to be the most honest person he knew. "Yes," Aldrich said. "All right." Darian moved. He was fast, much faster than he had appeared, and he moved toward Mara with the clear intention of the man who had decided that the controlled variable was going to stop being a variable and start being controlled. And Kane moved, as he had moved in the clearing, except this time there was no bear. There was a different kind of violence, and this time he was not the only one moving. Pyrrha and Seth came from both sides, and Aldrich stepped directly into Darian's path, and there was a moment of confrontation so tightly held that it seemed to have its own compressed weather. And then, it was over. Darian Stone stood in the forest with Aldrich in front of him, and Pyrrha and Seth at his flanks, and the formally invoked witness of 4 pack members to his attempt to physically coerce a protected guest, which was, as Mara would learn later, a violation of pack law so fundamental that it rendered the question of formal reviews somewhat moot. "The documentation," Kane said very quietly, "and the law of formal witness, and the testimony of Mara Ashwood regarding the conversation she was just invited into." He looked at Darian. "This is over." Darian looked at him for a long moment. The pleasantness was gone, and there was nothing particularly practiced in what was underneath it. "You have no rank," he said. "You were exiled." "Exile requires legitimate authority," Aldrich said, from where he stood. "I am challenging the legitimacy of that authority. As Beta, with the documentation I hold, I have the standing to trigger a formal review of the original succession, not the review of today's situation, the review of 3.5 years ago." He paused. "I should have done it then. I am doing it now." Kane looked at Mara. She looked at him. In the center of the circle, with the sealed ancient thing pressing against its barrier, and the warmth in her blood, and her grandmother's hands and 60 years of a woman's choice about a mountain, she looked at Kane Blackridge and thought, "I have been here before. Not me personally, but something that runs through me. Has been doing this work in this place since before either of us were born, and it chose this moment to call me home to it." She put both hands on the central stone of the circle and let herself answer the call. The light that came was not dramatic. It was not a pillar of fire or a crack of thunder. It was the color of late afternoon, through old growth trees, golden and green and moving, and it spread from her hands through the carved patterns in the stone with the unhurried certainty of water finding its level. The carved patterns lit and stabilized. The pressure of the thing against the barrier eased, not resolved, not finished, but recognized and acknowledged and told, "I am here. I am attending. You are held." The contamination in the soil did not disappear, but it stopped expanding. The point source went quiet. The wolves, in the forest and on the edge of the circle, watched it happen, and not one of them made a sound. We are in the final act now, and I need you with me for this, because everything that has been building, the corruption and the politics and the impossible bond forming between a woman who reads living systems and a man who spent 3 years in the dark watching a disaster build, is about to become something whole. Stay here. Stay with me. The formal review of the Blackstone succession took 11 days. Mara was not idle during those 11 days. She worked. She spent her mornings at the circle, learning, through a process that was equal parts intuitive and disciplined, how to engage with the seal in a way that stabilized it. She discovered that it was not a simple seal, not a plug in a drain, but a complex system that had required ongoing attention in the way a garden requires ongoing attention. Not constant intervention, but regular engagement. A relationship with the thing it contained, rather than merely a barrier against it. Her grandmother, she understood now, had not come to this mountain accidentally, had not chosen the cottage above the forest for its views, or its remove from the world she was done with, had come because she had felt, as Mara had stood at the boundary stones and felt, the pull of something that recognized her blood and called her toward it. She thought of her grandmother often during those 11 days, a small woman with long hands and a silence that had always seemed to contain more than silence usually holds, who had told her, when she was 12, that plants are not less alive for being rooted, that they have their own intelligence and their own attention and their own recognition of the people who come to them, who had left her a cottage and a mountain, and an inheritance so specific and so strange that it had taken a corrupted bear and a lone wolf and an ancient circle of stones to explain it. She also spent her days learning Cane, Blackridge. This was not a deliberate process. It happened the way the light changed in the forest, gradually and then absolutely, the quality of the world different in a way that you could not have predicted from the starting conditions, but that, once arrived at, seemed inevitable. He was recovering steadily, and recovering from significant wounds had apparently done nothing to diminish his capacity for the quality of attention she had first encountered in the clearing. And they found themselves spending hours together that began as discussion of the corruption and the seal and the political situation, and moved, with the organic unpredictability of conversations between people who are genuinely interested in each other's minds, into territory that had nothing to do with any of that. He had been alone for 3 years. She had been alone for 6. This was not the same kind of alone. She had chosen hers with the enthusiasm of an introvert who loves her work, and he had had his chosen for him with the efficiency of a formal exile. But the result was a similar familiarity with one's own company and a particular quality of attention to the details of things when the wide social field was removed. They talked about the mountain and its specific biological personality, the way certain ecosystems existed up here that could not be replicated elsewhere. They talked about pack structures and family systems and the ways that communities replicate in their social organization, the biological patterns of the organisms they are embedded in. They talked about his father and her grandmother and the strange specificity of inheritance, the way some things are passed not through teaching, but through blood and choice, and the convergent pressure of a world that needs certain things to exist. On the 8th day, she asked him what he wanted, not about the succession or the seal or the pack, just what he wanted, in the open-ended way that question almost never gets asked and almost never gets answered honestly. He was quiet for a long time. They were sitting outside on the south wall of the compound, looking out over the valley, the early evening making long gold of everything. "I want the forest to be healthy," he said. "I want the seal to hold. I want my father's name restored, and I want the truth of his death to be part of the formal record, not for revenge, but because it is wrong for things to be unrecorded." He paused. "I want a pack that is not afraid of its own alpha. Not because I want to lead it necessarily, but because I remember what it was when my father led it. And I know what is possible when people are not led by fear. He looked at the valley for a long time. I want to not be outside anymore, he said. Finally, very quietly, I have been outside for 3 years. I am tired of being outside. Mara looked at him in the evening light. She thought about the cottage she had chosen over the faculty office, the mountain she had chosen over the institution, the 6 years of being exactly where she wanted to be, and sometimes, in the particular dark of 2 a.m, feeling the weight of a silence that was occasionally too complete. I understand that, she said. He turned and looked at her, and his amber eyes had the quality of the light, golden and clear and without reserve. I know you do, he said. She kissed him, or he kissed her. She was never entirely sure afterward which of them moved first, and it seemed to her that this was appropriate, that some things are mutual from their initiation, and this was one of them. An answer to a question that had been forming since the clearing and the cleaning light, and the intention of a smile. He was careful with her, the way he had been careful with everything she had watched him be careful with, which was not the careful of someone who does not trust their own strength, but the careful of someone who understands the value of what they are holding. She was not careful in the same way, and this seemed to be right too. And the evening light went on doing what evening light does while they figured out what their specific version of this was going to be. The succession review concluded on the 11th day, with a unanimous finding by the gathered senior members of the Blackstone Pack. Darian Stone had obtained his position through circumstances that could not be confirmed as legitimate under Pack law, and the documentation Aldrich had held for 3.5 years, combined with the testimonies of Mara and the members of the Pack who had witnessed the events in the Stone Circle, created a picture that the review panel was not willing to ignore. He was not tried for his father's death, because the evidence was not sufficient for a formal charge on that specific account, and this was the thing that cost Kane the most. The Mara could see the grief of the truth not fully expressible in the formal record, but the succession was invalidated. His authority was voided, and the exile of Kane Blackridge, derivative of that authority, was voided with it. Darian left the territory without requiring forcible removal. He left the way powerful people sometimes do when the ground shifts beneath them, quickly and without the dramatic last stand that the story seemed to call for, because dramatic last stands are for people who believe they are the protagonists. And he had just been definitively informed that he was not. The Pack spent 3 days in something that was not quite celebration, and not quite mourning. The complicated emotional weather of people who have been released from something they had partly accepted, and partly resisted, and partly not allowed themselves to fully understand the weight of, until the weight was gone. And then, on the 14th day since Mara had walked past the boundary stones in search of silverweed, the question of what came next was present in the main lodge, and needed to be answered. Kane did not want to be Alpha. He was honest about this in a way that Mara had come to understand was characteristic of him. The specific honesty of a person who has decided that pretending things are other than they are costs more than it saves. He did not want to be Alpha, because he did not think of himself as a leader in that sense, because he had been outside for 3 years, and was aware that his knowledge of the current Pack's specific needs and dynamics had gaps, because the thing he was most genuinely interested in was the forest and the seal and the slow work of understanding what was happening on this mountain and stopping it. But he understood what a Pack without an Alpha meant, and he understood, in the way that honestly honest people understand things they would rather not, that understanding what is needed and being capable of providing it, and declining to provide it because you would prefer something else, is a particular kind of failure he was not willing to commit. We do not have to call it Alpha, Mara said. He looked at her. They were alone in the room that had been given to her. The window opened to the forest. The last of the evening's light the same gold as his eyes. The function exists regardless of what you call it, he said. The function of one person making decisions for 40 other people regardless of their input, or the function of someone ensuring that the community can function and coordinate and protect itself. He was quiet. The second one, he said. Then structure it as the second one. A council. Aldrich has been doing the actual work of running this Pack for years under a structure that did not honor that. Give it a structure that does. She paused. Lead differently. Not the way your father led, because his time was his time, and not the way Darian led, because that is the thing you are replacing. Lead the way this moment needs. He looked at her for a long time. You would stay, he said. I would stay. She looked at the window, the forest, the mountain she had been given by a woman who understood inheritance in ways that took generations to fully unfold. The seal needs ongoing attention. I have been here 6 years, and I have only just started to understand what this mountain is. And I am not done. She looked at him. I am also not done with this, she said, and indicated the space between them in a gesture that she was aware was slightly absurd, and that she made anyway because it was accurate. The space between us, he said. Yes, that is going to need ongoing attention too, he said. And there was a warmth in it, the full version of the smile she had been given glimpses of since the clearing. Yes, she agreed. It is. The Council of the Blackstone Pack was formalized the following month. It consisted of 7 members, drawn from different age groups and different roles within the pack, with Kane serving as the designated lead, which they called the steward, because Mara had been right that the function mattered more than the title, and Kane was right that the function required someone to hold it. Aldrich was the eldest member of the council and brought to it 40 years of continuity and the specific wisdom of a person who has made a significant mistake and survived understanding it. Seth, the young tawny-haired man who had frozen in the clearing and had not frozen when it mattered, was the youngest member, and the particular energy he brought to it, the energy of someone who has just discovered that the rules he was raised with were not laws of nature, was something the council needed. Pyrrha served as the council's memory, which was partly a role and partly a recognition of the fact that she had an exceptional capacity for information and context that the whole structure benefited from. The seal held. Mara tended it. She learned its rhythms the way she had learned the rhythms of every living system she had spent time with, through patient observation and respectful engagement, and the willingness to be changed by what she was learning. The contamination retreated. The soil markers improved. The deer returned to their normal patterns, and the birds no longer fell from the sky, and the bears of the high country went back to being only bears, enormous and impressive and entirely of the natural world. Her sister came to visit in the spring, and stayed for 2 weeks, and spent a significant portion of those 2 weeks watching Kane with the expression of someone conducting a security assessment and finding it satisfactory. She did not say this directly. She said, on the morning she left, "He looks at you like you are interesting," which from her sister was the highest possible endorsement. "I know," Mara said. "Good," her sister said, and got in her car and drove back down the mountain. The cottage became 2 people's home. This happened without formal announcement or dramatic declaration, with the organic inevitability of 2 people who have each, separately, become very good at being alone and have discovered that they are better at being together. He brought to it the things he had carried for 3 years in the forest: a collection of hand-drawn maps, a knowledge of the deep woods that no one else had, the ability to be quiet in the way that only people who have been genuinely alone are quiet, as though silence is not an absence, but a thing with its own texture. She contributed 6 years of accumulated practical wisdom about the mountain and a botanical library that took up an entire wall, and the specific quality of focused warmth that Kane told her, once, in the manner of someone reporting a fact, was the thing he had seen in the clearing before the bear arrived, the light falling around her differently at the boundary stones. "You are the reason I stayed close enough to get there in time," he told her. "Not to be dramatic about it. You are allowed to be dramatic about it," she said. "That is objectively dramatic. I am not a dramatic person," he said. "You stepped out of shadow to fight a corrupted bear for a woman you had never formally met," she said. "You are a little bit dramatic." The corner of his mouth. The complete smile. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe a little." The pack healed. Not quickly and not without difficulty, because the things that Darian Stone's authority had permitted and protected did not disappear when he did. They had to be addressed one by one, the specific injustices and the accumulated fears and the habits that form when people are led by something they cannot fully trust. The council worked at it consistently, not dramatically, with the understanding that genuine change is made of small decisions repeated rather than single large gestures. Cain was patient with this, in the way he was patient with the forest. With the deep patience of someone who understands that things grow in their own time, and that the function of good stewardship is not to accelerate natural processes, but to create the conditions in which they can proceed. Aldrich, on a particular afternoon in the second autumn after the succession, came to Mara in the kitchen garden where she was doing something practical with an herb she had transplanted from the high woods. He stood beside her for a moment in the easy silence of people who have come to know each other well. "He is happy," Aldrich said, not surprised. "Something more than that, more textured." "Yes," Mara said. "I have known him since he was born," Aldrich said. "I have watched him be many things. Capable, honest, stubborn, loyal. I have watched him be right when it cost him everything to be right." A pause. "I had not seen him be happy before." Mara looked at the herb she was transplanting, its roots carefully balled in the soil of its origin, being set into new earth with the particular attention that transplanting required. "He was outside for a long time," she said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "But he is inside now." She thought about the seal and its rhythms, and the warmth that moved through her blood when she engaged with the ancient carved patterns. She thought about two people who had been separately watching the same disaster and had found each other at the boundary, one crossing and one arriving. She thought about inheritance and the specific things that are passed not through teaching, but through blood and choice and the long patience of a world that needs certain things to exist. "Yes," she said, "he is. This is where the story finds its resting place. Not an ending." Exactly. Because the forest continues and the seal continues and the work continues, but a place where you can breathe, where the thing that has been building has arrived at something whole. Mara Ashwood, who crossed 3 white boundary stones in search of silverweed, and found herself standing at the edge of everything her blood had been moving toward for generations. Cain Blackridge, who spent 3 years outside in the dark watching a catastrophe build and stepped out of shadow one morning, because something in him recognized the light falling differently around a woman at the edge of the woods. A pack that has learned, slowly and with difficulty, and with the specific grace of communities that survive their own worst chapters, that being led well means being led by someone who understands that power is not the same as authority, and that both are not the same as service. The forest is healthy. The seal holds. The mountain keeps its ancient attention turned toward whatever it attends. 2. Patient, and very old and very glad, in the way that very old things are glad, to have found its keeper again, and in the cottage above the valley, where the light comes through old growth in the particular way that made a woman stay when she meant to leave, a woman with her grandmother's hands, and a man who came from shadow to stand between her and the dark, have made the specific ordinary life that is, when you look at it directly, the most extraordinary thing there is. If this story reached you, if it found the part of you that knows what it is to be outside and to want to be inside, to be seen with the quality of attention that says you are not just known but recognized, then please leave a comment below and tell me what it meant to you. Tell me what you carry from this. Tell me the part that stayed. And if you have someone in your life who needs a story like this one today, share it with them. Because stories that hold truth travel better when they travel in company. Like this video if it gave you something. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that go to the real places, that do not look away from the complicated and the difficult and the beautiful, that trust you to feel the full weight of them. We will see you in the next one. Stay wild, stay rooted, stay here.